Good morning, everybody. Nice to be here. Do I have some slides coming? Excellent. I was here a couple of weeks ago working with some of you. How many were in those workshops that we did a couple of weeks ago? Anyone? Give me a wave. Fantastic. It's nice to be back. I do have some slides coming. I want to talk to you today about a couple of issues, not issues, but just things to think about. I often feel like the job of a keynote is to just throw some ideas at you, and over the next few days, as you interact with all of these workshops and things, maybe it'll just strike a chord. So that's my mission today. I'm operating on little sleep at the moment, so I hope I do make sense to you. It was a long trip from Australia. I do work for the team over in Google, but prior to that, I was a classroom teacher for about a little over 30 years, so I hope I can bring some classroom experience to this as well. All right. Tap dancing. This was working fine before, wasn't it? Excellent, okay. All right, so we're going to talk a little bit about artificial intelligence. It's a topic that's pretty hard to avoid these days. Everywhere you go, every conference you go to, every time you open the news, every time you look at anything, they're talking about artificial intelligence. In fact, I did notice that there are some of the fastest things on Earth is the cheetah at 180 kilometres an hour, then there's an aeroplane at about 500 kilometres an hour. Speed of light is about 300 kilometres an hour. Per second, I mean, and then people becoming experts in AI. That's probably the fastest moving thing on the planet right now. One of the things that pop up all the time, you've probably seen it too, is this little thing, I am not a robot. I find it fascinating that we are still at the stage now where we have to prove to a machine that we're actually really human, right? Think about that, that's kind of strange really. But we do it all the time. In fact, I took this screenshot the other day when I was creating one of these avatars like Nadia up here. I was actually creating a little video of an avatar, and after I was creating the video, it asked me to prove I was a human, which I thought was completely ironic. I would like to introduce you to this gentleman, Dr. Robert Epstein. And there's a really interesting story about Robert Epstein. He's an American psychologist, journalist, thinker. He's a PhD in psychology from Harvard. Mr. Epstein he's an editor-in-chief of Psychology Today. He's been at Boston University, University of California, Harvard, and he's the founder of the Cambridge Center for Behavioral Studies. So I think we can all agree he's a pretty smart guy. Would you agree? The part of Robert Epstein's story that I want to share with you is about how he is unlucky in love. So in 2006, Robert Epstein went online on an internet dating service to look for a partner. And he connected with this woman called Emily. And he really connected with Emily. They had a great chat. They talked back and forth. They developed a rapport over a number of days and weeks. And he was starting to really like this woman, who also happened to be in California where he was. So I thought, this is great. We get to meet. Fantastic. And then Emily broke the bad news to him that she actually wasn't in California. She was in fact in Russia, in a small town in Russia. But by this stage he was smitten. She was beautiful and he enjoyed the conversation, even though it was a bit stilted sometimes because of the language barrier. But he really liked this woman. So he kept talking. And the language barrier was interesting. Occasionally she would say weird things and he would go, oh, well, it's just the language gap. And about 4.5 months into this relationship, he started to suspect that something wasn't quite right. And just as a test, he went to his computer and he just typed gibberish. And the woman responded with, how's your mother going, by the way? And it was at that moment that he realized that he had been spending the last 4.5 months chatting to a bot. Now, the interesting thing about this guy, Dr. Robert Epstein, not only does he have all these accolades, he not only is a smart guy, one of his specialties is artificial intelligence, and in particular, human-machine relationships. So it's particularly ironic that he spent 4.5 months talking to a bot. The other part of this, ironic part of this story, is that, guys, can I get you to keep that clear, because I need a line of sight here. Thanks. Is that Epstein was also a founder of the Loebner Prize. Now, the Loebner Prize, in case you haven't heard of it, you might have heard it called the Turing Test, right? So the Loebner Prize is an annual competition where they try and determine whether machines can think, essentially. The Turing test was originally founded by this guy here, Alan Turing. Alan Turing was a computer scientist during the 1940s and 50s. He was instrumental in many things that happened in World War II in terms of England winning that part of the war. And he was quite a genius computer scientist and a founding father of the ideas of artificial intelligence. And Turing proposed this thing called a Turing test, which was essentially a method of inquiry in artificial intelligence to determine if a machine could exhibit evidence of thinking. In other words, he was fascinated with this idea of, can machines think? It's an interesting question, isn't it? Can machines think? And I don't think you can ponder that question without asking yourself another question here. Can you think? Can I think? And if so, if you can think, how do you know? How do you know when someone is thinking? You can't see inside their head. So the only evidence that you can justify imagining whether someone is thinking or not is looking at the output. Would you agree? And so Turing proposed this test, which we refer to today as the Turing test, although he used to call it the imitation game. And it works like this. You take a room and you put a chatbot, a piece of computer code that can interact via text, and you put a human, and then you get a judge, and you get the judge to interact with the human and with the chatbot, and they interact together for 5 minutes. Not a long time. And in the space of that 5-minute interaction, they have to decide whether they think they're talking to a machine or they think they're talking to a human. And Turing posited this idea that, when we get to the stage where we can talk to a machine and not realise it's a machine, we will have moved to a whole new phase of artificial intelligence. That was the key idea. So it turns out that one judge is not enough. So they actually use lots of judges, and many judges have these conversations with the bot and with the human. And to pass the Turing test, you have to convince 30% of the judges that they think they're talking to a human when in fact it's a machine. If the machine can fool the judges after a 5-minute conversation, 30% of the judges, it's deemed to have passed the Turing test. Does that make sense? So I thought that was kind of interesting. Turing's prediction then was at the end of the century, so it's around the year 2000, that the use of words and general educated opinion will have altered so much that one will be able to speak of machines thinking without being contradicted. He thought that by the time we got to the turn of the century, this ability to interact with a machine would be so advanced that we would just take it for granted. It would just be a normal thing. We didn't quite make that timeline. Since then, there's been many, many chatbots developed over the years, many different artificial intelligence conversational codes. But I think the most interesting one is this one, called Eugene Goostman. Has anyone heard of Eugene Goostman? So Goostman is the first chatbot that actually won or passed the Turing test. Okay? And this happened in 2014. And Goostman, the chatbot, was pretending to be a 13-year-old boy from Odessa in the Ukraine. Now, it turned out that after a 5-minute chat, 33% of the judges believed they were talking to a human when in fact it was a machine. Now, I don't know how I feel about that, because there's a few things going on here. So, for example, if you're a 13-year-old boy, or if you're pretending to be a 13-year-old boy, you obviously have enough knowledge about the world that you can have a conversation, but not enough knowledge that you can have a really sophisticated conversation. There's a lot you still don't know. And plus, if you're doing it in a language which is not your own, then that kind of excuses you when you say dumb things, right? Because it's just not coming across the right way. So it did, in fact, fool 33% of the judges into believing that Eugene Goostman, the chatbot, was in fact Eugene Goostman, a 13-year-old boy. So I have to ask, did the machine pass the Turing test, or did the human fail it? I think that's a really interesting question, right? As we start to interact with machines, we talk a lot about the stuff that AI can do now, and we're worried about some of it, but I sometimes wonder, is the success of some of our machines to do things more of a statement on us as human beings sometimes? Just something to think about as you go through the next couple of days. If you start to think about how we got to this point, if you go back to traditional programming, we used to have to tell a machine what something was. So in this case, we talk about a cat. A cat has it's an animal with 4 legs and 2 eyes and so on, and we have to tell it what a cat is. But around 2012-ish, historically, we changed the way we approach telling computers things, and we developed this method called a neural network. And in a neural network, we don't describe the cat, we just show the machine lots of pictures of cats. And we show it enough pictures that eventually we can show it a picture it's never seen before and go, I think that's a cat. That's a neural network, that's machine learning. And then the thing that's really changed in the last few years, really, is this idea of a generative language model. And it works like this. It's just go and read everything you can and then tell me what a cat is, right? That's, in simple terms, that's what a generative AI model really does. You train it on lots of data and hopefully it can tell you things back from learning lots of things. Now, that's all fairly general stuff. I suppose I should tell you some Google-related stuff. You will find AI everywhere in your daily lives, and I'll give you some Google examples here. So if you ask your Google Assistant, and I won't say, hey G, because all your phones will go off, right? But if I say, ask the assistant about the weather, it can tell me about the weather. How many of you unlock your phone by looking at your phone? Okay, that's artificial intelligence in action. When you use Google Maps to find the most efficient route, that's artificial intelligence in action. Originally, Google Translate, the engine that was originally built to power Google Translate is in fact the same transformer model that powers a lot of our generative AI these days. And of course YouTube plays songs you've never heard of but will probably like. This is all machine learning and artificial intelligence in action. Now, you've probably seen, if you've gone to Google Photos, you can go into Google Photos and just say, show me a picture of a dog. And it will show you all the dog photos in your collection. You've never tagged them, you've never labeled them. It just knows that that's a dog because it's been trained on lots of information. Now, Google has had a significant input to a lot of the development of AI over the last several years. In fact, I often laugh that everyone talks a lot about ChatGPT, but without thinking that the T inside ChatGPT stands for the word transformer, which is a model that we came up with back in 2017. And we open sourced it to the world, and of course it's powered a lot of other things since then. But we've developed many models over the last couple of years in terms of, I think we've been world leaders in terms of developing AI models that power many, many things. In fact, if you look just inside something like, well, I'm sure many of you have used Google products, Google Workspace, Classroom, Gmail, and so on. If you look inside those products, I think what we've tried to do with our AI is to build it in such a way that it's really clever and helpful, that it powers a lot of things. So, for example, when you are typing an email and it will suggest the next sentence for you, or when you are in a Google Sheet and you're not sure how to write that formula and it will suggest the formula for you, right? We're trying to build really helpful technology directly into products rather than necessarily being somewhere else you need to go. So that's kind of been our approach to try and make it as helpful as possible. Some of the other things that we have coming, or not coming, but they're here now, practice sets, which is a feature inside Google Classroom, which provides an AI-powered tutor for students, helps teachers prepare work for students, it helps students do the work, and it helps teachers analyse the work afterwards, all powered by a form of AI right there inside the product. We've also developed a thing called Read Along, which is a read-along tutor. Kind of not quite like Nadia, but that's, I think, the idea is to provide an on-demand tutor for students that gives them what they need at the time they need it. And we're building that into products like Read Along. And of course, recently we announced this thing called Duet AI, which is building our artificial intelligence right inside Google Workspace. So for example, you're inside a Google Doc and you want to write something, you can ask it to help you inside the Google Doc, rather than need to go somewhere else and bring it back into your word processor. Okay, so we're trying to be as helpful as possible with all these technologies that we're building. In fact, we have a whole bunch of principles around AI, and I'm very mindful of time, but I would recommend you go to that address at the bottom there, ai.google. Don't worry about the rest of it, you'll find it once you get there, ai.google, and you'll find a whole lot of information about our AI principles. And we believe that when we're developing AI, it has to do certain things and it has to not do certain things. We don't want it to be used for the wrong causes, and we want to make sure we think about the way we're developing it so it's used responsibly and ethically. We're very, very big on that. I just want to show you this very quick video of a guy interacting with one of these things, a chatbot connected to a virtual presence, to give you an example of a thing called inference chaining, where you ask a machine something that's not directly the question, but it figures it out. Let me just show you. Can we have some sound on that, please? I might have to go back. Sound on that? Coming in a second. Okay. All right. Just while he's doing that, I just want to mention a couple of these things. So, being socially beneficial, making sure that when we build machines, we don't build in bias. That is incredibly difficult to try and avoid bias, and we put a lot of thought and energy into doing that. Test things for safety, be accountable to people, make sure that we incorporate privacy design, like right there embedded in the machine. Are we good to go? Okay, cool. And high standards of scientific excellence, and to make sure that everything we do is in accordance with all of these principles. Very important to us. Okay, I want to show you this video.
Michael is at that really famous museum in France, looking at its most famous painting. However, the artist who made this painting just makes Michael think of his favourite cartoon character from his childhood. What was the country of origin of the thing that the cartoon character usually holds in his hand?
The most famous painting in the Louvre is the Mona Lisa. The artist who made the Mona Lisa is Leonardo da Vinci. Leonardo da Vinci is also the name of the main character in the cartoon Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Leonardo da Vinci is from Italy. The thing that Leonardo da Vinci usually holds in his hand is a katana. The country of origin of the katana is Japan. The answer is Japan.
Impressive, right? So we're definitely getting to a point where we're asking this question, can machines think? And I think we're starting to see some evidence that they are exhibiting behaviours that you could say is a form of thinking. Now, a couple of examples of AI in action. This is just general generative AI. This is not necessarily Google stuff, right? But just good examples of the way things is getting used out in the real world. This article popped up the other day of a Brisbane mother who's saving $150 a week and 5 hours of time by using generative AI to help her with grocery shopping. Something as mundane as that, right? Or this example over here where a Court of Appeal judge in the UK praises jolly useful ChatGPT, right, for helping with the ability to help them look at legal rulings, right? And as the judge says over here, I think what is of most interest is that you can ask these large language models to summarize information, and all it did was a task which I was about to do and which I knew the answer and could recognize as being acceptable. So it wasn't a matter of just setting the AI loose and just hoping for the best, but using it as a partner to develop something like as well as using his own human knowledge, right? That's the key part. And then just last one here, that researchers right now are comparing written responses from physicians and generative AI to real-world health questions and found that a panel of licensed healthcare professionals preferred generative AI responses 79% of the time. And that generative AI was showing higher levels of empathy than most doctors. Interesting statistic. And as it says down the bottom, the best pathway forward here is the suggestion that physicians working together with such technologies may be the way forward. It's not an either-or proposition. If you start to look at the way some of these models are unfolding, general knowledge over there, AI better than humans. No surprise there. Passing the US SAT exam, AI better than humans. IQ benchmarks, Polish national math exams, UK national maths exams, IQ benchmarks. We are being exceeded by artificial intelligence in all of these. If you look at the generative AI models, this is a quote from Alan Thompson, who's, if you have never heard of him, look him up. He's an amazing researcher. Generative AI models hitting the ceilings of many gold standard benchmarks previously reserved for genius-level humans, including achieving 100% in theory of mind tests, including 99.9% percentile in the Wechsler Adult Intelligence Scale IQ test, and the 99th percentile in the Torrance test of creative thinking. Now, I guess you could argue, are the machines getting smart enough to be able to pass all these so they're smarter than us? Or maybe these tests not measuring the right things? You could have a whole debate about that level of stuff. So coming back to the question again, can machines think? I thought what I'd do just to finish this off is ask an AI that question. So I went to this lovely little AI called Pi. I really like this one. If you've never tried it, pi.ai. And I've typed in the question, can machines think? And it came back with this, which I hope it will read to you. There's audio here somewhere. Could you click that little the sound button up in the top corner? Thank you. And there's a play button on it. Yeah, click that and then the play, yeah. So this was not only the machine generating an answer.
Think the way humans do. They can process information and learn from it, but they don't have the same self-awareness, creativity, or emotional intelligence that humans do. Others argue that as AI becomes more advanced and complex, it's possible that machines could eventually develop something resembling consciousness and the ability to reason. It's a fascinating debate that's been going on for decades.
It's not a bad response from a machine. And the machine read it to me as well. So I think we're definitely getting to a point where it's not, thank you, next slide, maybe next slide. Just click on the page. There you go. The next part of this conversation we'll be having, and I think we'll be having this conversation relatively soon, is not so much about AI, but AGI, or artificial general intelligence. This idea that we're not just building machines that can do one thing very well, but we're building generally intelligent machines that can do many things really well. And that'll scale with the number of parameters in the models and a whole bunch of other technical stuff that happens. But that'll be the next conversation. Artificial general intelligence, what some people refer to as the singularity, right? There's been many predictions about when we get to that point. When will machines literally be as smart as us? The predictions I'm hearing right now are anywhere between 2 and 5 years from now, which is both frightening and inspiring, right? Because it's frightening because if you look at the science fiction models of AI that gets too smart, some of it can be a bit dystopian, right? But I do believe that what the conversations we should be having now about this is, to use the de Bono hat example, is not to just to focus all about the things that are negative and the cautions and the bad things and what if this happens. Let's be aware of that stuff, but let's also remember there's a whole bunch of other hats we should be wearing while we look at this as well. Things are like, how is this going to help us with our creativity? How can this help us in a positive way? And so on and so on. So as you go through the next couple of days, you're going to hear a lot of stuff about AI, right? You're going to hear a lot of really scary stuff, I imagine. So just think about wearing all of your hats as you're viewing this through this lens, so you're making intelligent choices going forward. Thank you very much.